All right, now we're again talking with Larry James, who worked in the time control part of the Montauk project. We're just going to conduct our interview today to get a better overview of Montauk, more specifically what happened with the time control project. Larry, welcome to the program again.
Thank you.
What year do you think it actually started?
Well, it goes all the way back to the Philadelphia experiment. I wasn't involved in that, of course, but that was the beginning phases of, I guess, it would be the realization that, it can actually be obtained. Mm-hmm. And
when you say that, you mean
time travel.
Time travel, invisibility.
Well,
the whole thing.
Well, that was the whole thing. Is that was the original object, was to become stealthy and invisible. Mm-hmm. With Philadelphia, and they, tripped and stumbled and found time travel. Mm-hmm.
Well, we've interviewed many people, and they pretty much say that experiment was abandoned, that it was a failure. After 43, they decided that for whatever the reasons were, it didn't work.
Well, it actually continued on to 47, mm-hmm. and what it was is it was abandoned at that time because they knew something was going on, but they didn't know what it was. They didn't know what they had at the time.
So it was abandoned in its present form.
At that time, yeah.
At that time, but the work still continued.
It continued on later. It was opened up. Mm-hmm. Later on. It was in the late 40s when it was shut down and was reopened by a group of people who were working on a project called Mirage. Basically, it was a continuation of an investigation into stealth technology. And what was this? From that point, they were doing things like they started back in the 40s, towards the end of the war, where they were actually painting battleships. And painting them in all sorts of wild and crazy shapes and colors. You had battleships that looked like zebras. You had pink ships with blue clouds on them. And you had yellow triangles and blue dots, and all these weird shapes and things, painted onto the ships. And strangely enough, you could actually lose them on the horizon. You could not see them. But they would still show up on the new technology at the time called radar. Mm-hmm. And so the work was to continue on in the electronics field also to actually get rid of that electronic signature.
Now, okay, Larry, was this group a group of people inside, say, the Navy or the Air Force or whatever, or was it an outside group working on this stealth technology?
It was kind of like a government contractor, mm-hmm. and they were just basically working on the experimentation to, for stealth technology.
Did they have access to all the data on the Philadelphia experiment, though?
Not until later. After it was about a year after the project was shut down, the government actually tried, obviously, to hide the information. But
why did they want to hide it, by the way?
Because of the accidents that had occurred, and the human life, the toll that had been taken, and they didn't know how to control it. They didn't know what they had. So the best thing to do, instead of create a stir and a panic, they covered it up. Just like they do with most things, but when they don't want to create a panic.
So you think they kept it secret because perhaps maybe they felt it was such a powerful technology it could be weaponized against the U.S. government?
Sure.
But at that point we didn't really understand how to use it, how to control it. All we knew is that we had a ship, it was invisible for 20 minutes, came back, and I think 4 or 5 sailors were embedded in the hull at the time.
Yeah.
The rest of them sort of woozied around a little bit.
Some of them had their brains scrambled.
Had their brains scrambled. Do you actually, have you ever heard any stories about what actually happened with some of these sailors?
There is a hospital up in New York
Mm-hmm.
that they're in, and I'm sorry I can't tell you that name of that hospital right now. I can probably actually find out for you.
Is it a VA hospital, do you think?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
And
you think the remaining survivors are still there?
yeah, they are most definitely there. There is a colleague of mine whose mother was a nurse there,
Mm-hmm.
and he's told me about it before. And yeah, they're still there.
Were they still having the same phasing problems of, you know, being there 1 minute and then phasing out to another dimension? Or was that gone by now?
Most of the people who had that problem,
Mm-hmm.
they completely phased out and disappeared within the first 2 years.
Mm.
And so yeah, that all, you know, kind of happened right away.
So do you think these people in the hospitals are put there to be quiet, or are they put there because they went crazy?
They went crazy, and they just, you know, they're just totally mentally not there anymore.
Wow.
So, but anyways, getting back to the original question, this group who was working on the stealth technology picked up on the Philadelphia experiment and realized that, you know, it did have something to do with time travel, but still it was unharnessed, and it was pursued through the Phoenix Project all the way up through the 70s, and it was sponsored by the government up to the point.
So that you're saying this group was a private contractor,
right?
Do we know the name of this private contractor, or is that something we need to keep quiet?
That's something we probably should keep quiet.
Okay, so we'll just say a private contractor. Did this contractor actually work with the group at Montauk?
Yeah, that's where everything was moved to eventually.
Okay.
Back in the 70s.
Back in the 70s. So
Early
it went
70s.
really from the 50s through that's 20 years.
Yeah.
Where it actually worked on this technology.
Mm-hmm. And they were having, they had very little success in getting anywhere with it until the 70s.
Mm-hmm. Now Preston talks about a company called AIL
Mm-hmm.
who did this sort of thing. Is that the type of group that would have
Sure.
been involved in this? Okay, because AIL was where he worked in.
There was more than one company that worked on it.
So they spread it out.
Yeah.
In an effort to try to conquer this. Were they thinking time travel at the time?
Yes, they were actually.
They wanted to do time travel.
Right. But also, we've talked about things as far as like a UFO presence
Mm-hmm.
and alien presence with alien technology, and I'd like to address that a little bit because what it is the government obviously looked into that. They knew that you know there was that type of technology out there, that it had been harnessed, and what was this? That's why things like very publicized Project Blue Book, you know, had come about.
Mm-hmm.
And Blue Book, as everybody knows, was the government's search for UFOs, and you know, try and you know, capture one. And that's been well documented. There's also been several different groups as far as there's more than just Blue Book. There's also Red Book, Yellow Book, White Book, and that was just part of the series. And that's there again. This is CIA/Air Force that was doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like Yellow Book was to find out all the technical information. Red Book was to find out medical information, and so on.
What was Blue Book then?
Blue Book was to actually find and
Hardware?
It was to actually find the UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be chasing them down, or you know, just basically seeking them out.
But wasn't there a point in time, Larry, where we actually met with extraterrestrials, our government met with extraterrestrials,
Yeah.
and hammered out agreements where we would get certain technology and they would have certain access to whatever we agreed to let them have access to?
That's correct.
So there was a partnership struck at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine that we would have had access to certain technology during the 50s or the 60s and the 70s as a result of this agreement.
That's true. The thing was, there's more than one type of alien out there also, as we've discussed before.
Do you know who it was that we made this agreement with?
To my understanding, because I don't know for sure,
Okay.
to my understanding, it was had to do with the Greys, where we had struck a deal with them, but we reneged on them.
Oh, we did.
Yeah, they gave us certain technologies. In exchange, we were to give them certain technologies and information, and we didn't. And so that kind of pissed them off.
Okay, but that's just hearsay for you.
That's just hearsay.
You don't know for a fact. All right.
Right.
But as you were actually working in the program, did you ever get technical information or hardware or anything that came from the Greys?
I just got the hardware. I don't know where it came from.
So that would be another group of people who developed the hardware. You were sort of in
that
the
would be under Yellow
operations
Book,
end.
yeah.
Okay. I thought it was Blue Book worked on the hardware.
No, Blue Book worked on chasing them down.
Okay, and Yellow Book worked on
getting the technology
into a form that we could use it in, right?
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
Well, also, yeah, remember too, just like our computer language isn't the same as, say, the computer language they use in China.
Right.
We had to convert, the alien computer language also.
That must have been a huge effort.
Sure.
Somewhere.
Yeah, you would think.
Well, you would think, and obviously, since there would have to be thousands of people involved in this, you would think some of that would have had to have leaked out by now.
Well, that's the thing is you compartmentalize things, and you only give certain groups little bits and pieces. So you give one group over here, Group A, a piece of the puzzle. You give Group B a piece of the puzzle, and never the two should meet.
Well, that's good for security, but I would think that would take a lot longer to actually crack the code.
Sure, it does, and I can speak from working in between both white projects and black projects. White projects were, our government projects that are given out, and they're secret, but they're not covert. Black projects are more covert, more undercover, and basically you don't mess with them. And what it is the black programs would know the information, know more information than the white project normally. And they would sit there at lunch and laugh at the guys in the white projects because they're trying to figure out this problem, and the guys in the black projects already knew the answers to them. And so, yeah, they're sitting there laughing at them. To clear up one thing about black projects, you always hear things about, the $700 hammer and the $500 toilet seat. Well, of course, there is no such thing. Anybody can go out to a hardware store and for $5 buy a hammer. Well, basically, what it is that money is being diverted, so that it's no longer under congressional control, and where it's, the money's being dealt out, and so that they can actually fund these programs.
Well, yeah, I think that's a pretty well-known fact by now.
Yeah, because
that's how they got their funding, among many other ways, right?
Right.
Okay. So, let's see. When did, say, some of the first big breakthroughs occur in time travel?
And that would have been
in the development of time travel, in development of our capabilities to time travel?
That would have been in the late 70s.
In the late 70s?
Late 70s.
Not the early 70s?
No. We had some breakthroughs there, but what it was is there was a lot of offshoots that came out of it. The early 70s is where the mind control was found out, and because we had gone into working with frequencies, and with that they found with a frequency you could actually read minds, manipulate minds, and so that actually, when the government found out about that, they said, well, we're done with you. We don't want to be controlled. So what we're going to do is we're just going to shut you down. No more funding, no more anything. And so then the project went underground.
What year was this now?
That was in 73.
73. So you lost your funding from the U.S. government.
Yes.
What branch of the government was actually providing the funding?
That was Congress.
Congress was? It wasn't a military branch, though? Well, Congress provides funding for everything.
Right.
But I would imagine, though, that it would have been...
It was open research at that time.
Just open research. Right.
Yeah.
And so someone presented the results saying, we know how to work with frequencies, and working within these frequencies, we can actually control what someone thinks, what someone does. Here's how we do it. And you're saying that the people in Congress looked at this, got a little scared.
That's a fact.
And said, not no, but hell no.
Right.
We're not going to let you go on, and because we're afraid that you're going to use this on us.
That's correct.
Right? And so in 1973, Congress decided to shut the funding down. Right?
That's correct.
For the researchers who were at Montauk. And can you give us a little profile? Where did these guys come from, and were they working above ground or below ground at that time?
We were working above ground, and it wasn't even so much at Montauk at that point. That was more in the Brookhaven area. And what it was is we realized that at that point, without our funding, that we still had to continue on. We still hadn't obtained our, fully our objective,
and
which
objective
was time travel.
Complete time travel. Okay. So mind control was a byproduct.
Mind
sort of
control
like
was a byproduct.
it was the first door that you had to go through to get to time travel, wasn't it?
Right.
Because my guess is with time travel, you're sort of dematerializing and rematerializing a body, right?
Yeah.
And you're doing that through frequencies. Okay. And then in the process, you found out, wow, I have a map of all the frequencies. I can adjust it, or actually wipe out a few frequencies, and voila, what happens?
Well, then that person forgets.
And that's very important, Larry, because everybody talks about, and when we talk about Al, even with you, people are saying that their memories were wiped.
They were wiped. They were erased. Yes. And you can do that by hitting them with a certain frequency.
Do you project a frequency, or sort of like it's a gun, and you, what? How does that work? Well,
it's just kind of like any other type of frequency. I guess you could say a gun-like, but no, it's more just like a speaker, that's projecting.
Oh. So you put them in front of the speaker. You know exactly which frequencies to shoot out of the speaker.
Well, no, you'd basically in the earlier stages.
Okay. So
you actually had to hook them up. So in other words, they were like the speaker receiving.
How would you hook them up?
Oh, just there was actually, we built a headpiece that you put on their head. So that was pretty much it.
You put a headpiece on their head.
Yeah, they had little electrodes.
Okay, like the electrodes that we see in hospitals and things like where you're trying to monitor someone, right? So you put a number of electrodes on them, and then you would pump some
You pump in the frequency
in there.
Yep.
Okay. And how was the right frequency to just wipe out that tiny part of their mind? How was it identified and then put into form to be injected?
Actually, the brain waves were recorded.
On tape?
Yeah. Well, it was a reel-to-reel tape, but it was all computerized. And so yeah, you could actually take the recording and then run back and feed that in, so you can actually implant memories and you can actually remove memories. You can do both.
It's sort of like editing audio tape in a sense, wasn't it?
Almost, but a little more complex because you're doing it to a human.
There's more data, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you wanted to implant a memory, say that, I don't know, you were the President of the United States, whatsoever, could you actually get that memory from the President, save the memory on tape, and then edit that memory into the tape of this person you're trying to mind control, and then play that tape back through these electrodes or whatever that are on their head, and then they believe they're the President?
In theory, yes, that could be done.
Okay.
I'm not saying it ever was done, but
that wasn't a...
No, that's just a generic scenario.
Right.
Yeah, that's generally what you could do.
So what would be some memories, though, that they would implant?
Really, there was nothing specific. I mean, that was just all part of testing at the time.
Okay.
So yeah, there was nothing specific on that.
So, okay, but it wasn't... but to wipe memories, I would think, was a fairly routine thing.
It became more routine later on, yes.
It seems like, though, if you got the wrong data, I mean, you could wipe out, you know, let's just say...
You could wipe a person raw, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, could you say wipe out their ear? If all it is that were a frequency, and you get, you know, you move from the frequency of the mental thinking over to the physical part, and you just accidentally hit something on the physical frequency, could they sort of come back with missing arm or missing ear or something, or would that not be possible?
Well, there wasn't anything like that possible at this particular type of stage. That was something else that was a possibility later on.
Okay, but in this stage you're just dealing with the mind and what's going on in the thinking of the mind. Well, would it be possible then to wipe out a specific function accidentally that was housed in the mind?
Sure.
Did that happen?
Sure. There were a couple of vegetables made.
Okay. I mean, like they could come back and, oops, I can't smell anymore. Or, oops, I can't taste anymore.
Well, no, because, see, those are actually physical attributes that you have.
But the mind is what makes those physical attributes happen.
It actually translates it.
Right.
So, you know, it's still there and it's still working. So, but as far as having for like a sense of smell, yeah, you could theoretically wipe out anybody's thoughts on previous smells. Or you could actually implant smells. You know, have them think that they've smelled something before that they never have.
Could you actually implant triggers into someone's mind so that when a certain word was spoken, a certain card was shown, whatever, that programming was then initiated for them to go and carry out? Yes,
yeah, that was available. And that was actually one of the things that was presented to Congress at the time, which, you know, got the project shut down.
So this, you know, that brings to mind that movie, The Manchurian Candidate. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie or not.
No, I've never seen it.
But that was all based on, you know, I think a movie set. Frank Sinatra was in that movie.
Okay.
And I think they were in the Korean War. Don't quote me on this, but they were captured by the Chinese and the Russians, and actually were programmed to become killers, essentially. So they came back, and when certain words were said, I think when one of the guys got a phone call, he would then go out and kill someone, that then blink out of it and not know that he had done that.
That sounds like a particular type of psychological warfare, and that sounds like it was done through conventional brainwashing.
Well, it was just a movie, though, that was made, but people think
that, that's another way of doing it, though. And what it is that you obviously have to go through a long process, of depriving them, of protein, and years of abuse.
You have to go. You couldn't use this mind control process that you're talking about?
That actually, using that, yes, you can. That you could speed up the process by literally seconds.
So in the old days, say back in the 40s and 50s, took weeks and weeks and weeks, didn't it?
Well, sure. And I'm sure that there's even conventionally today where they still do that. But
now it's been perfected in a sense, right?
Electronically, yes.
Right. So, I mean, these people that mind control was actually executed on them.
Yeah.
I mean, just giving us an example, what are some things that you would want them to become mind control slaves to? What did you try to get them to think or do?
I wasn't in that area.
So you just executed the program, right?
Right.
You didn't choose the...
I was solely working on time control.
Time control.
Time control, time travel.
But you would have had to have gone through the first doors of mind control, weren't you?
Yes.
To get to time control.
That was one of the experiments. But once we had gotten that aspect, that was turned over to another group, and that was pretty much just, for me, left behind.
Okay, so your focus was time control.
On time travel.
Pretty much. Okay, so I think we're at 73 right now. When did some of the first breakthroughs in time control occur?
Those were actually the late 70s, early 80s, and we were still trying to get it harnessed. Psychics were brought in, as we've discussed before, and that actually, we used them along with the chair. The chair actually enhanced the psychic abilities.
Did the MONTAUK-BOYS enhance the psychic abilities as well?
That was for testing purposes, but they had to be psychic in order to do that.
The boys or the person in the chair?
The person in the chair.
Right.
So the MONTAUK-BOYS were basically just a tool that we used. And I didn't deal with them too much. When I did deal with them, they were pretty much just like guinea pigs for experiments. And there were
literally thousands of these boys, wasn't there?
Oh yes, thousands of them.
And they were picked up off the streets in all the major cities in the United States.
Well, that's the whole thing, is that every major city has thousands of homeless people, because it wasn't just boys. I mean, it was just they were homeless people.
Oh, it could have been. Was it girls too?
Girls came later. We mostly focused with males at first.
Was it Caucasian?
To my knowledge.
From what you saw, was it mostly Caucasian males? Or any type of male?
There again, at first, that's all I saw. But see, there again, that was a project that I wasn't in charge of. That was somebody else's deal. And so.
You mean the Montauk-Boy project?
Right.
Right.
And so what was is, but they eventually brought in all sorts of races, as far as black, Hispanic, Asian.
So this would have been in the 80s then, right?
The early 80s.
In the early 80s, but was it still mostly males?
Yeah, mostly males.
Did you ever see any females brought in?
Not until later. I mean, that was late in the program for me.
Would that be in the late 80s, do you think?
No, that was mid-'80s.
Mid-'80s, that's when,
It was
something like that?
late
Mid-'80s?
85.
Okay, all right. Kind of the middle 80s,
Mhm.
we started seeing women in the program, but all initially male. Let's go back to where we have the first real big breakthrough. Something happened which allowed you to physically move a person from point A to point B, time A to time B. Okay, and there must have been the first one.
Well, it's all it's a slow progression.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and this, you know, obviously thousands and thousands of experiments. And what was this? Due to some of the special equipment, mainly the Delta T antenna, mm-hmm. Was able to, in junction with the psychics in the chair, actually were able to open up a hole in time, so to speak.
About what time was this? What year?
I can't remember specifically, but I want to say like around, well, it's between 80 and 82. Mm-hmm. I can't give you an actual date there. Mm-hmm. That just...
we hear a lot about this Delta T antenna.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and Preston talks about it. You talk about it a little bit, but
mm-hmm.
where did the technology to develop this Delta T antenna come from? Was that extraterrestrial?
I don't know for sure on that. I do know that came from another government contractor,
mm-hmm.
and
given to you.
Given to me. Mm-hmm. And you know, there again, what it did is it actually enhances the frequencies, and just by its shape. Many antennas you can feed in the same frequency, mm-hmm. but different shapes of the antenna, it'll do different things.
You know what might be helpful to the person listening right now is to picture this. Picture a slide projector, in a sense. And what that slide projector does is it projects an image on a wall.
Right.
In a sense, okay? So now the Delta T antenna is that slide projector.
That's correct.
And through by turning it on, you're projecting now something, a field. Mm-hmm. And this field, I believe, Larry, is what people would actually walk into.
That's correct.
To go to a different time and a different space, mm-hmm. right? So I think that will help you as you try to gain an idea. And also on this CD, we're going to have pictures of some of these Delta T antennas, so you can view this for yourself. So you say the Delta Ts in the early 80s were introduced. Mm-hmm. Did it really take the Delta T antennas to make time travel possible, or was it sort of played with prior to that?
I don't know how much they were played with, but it was it's one of the main keys. Mm-hmm. It actually opens up the time travel plane, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So you can actually jump from one time frame to another and one time plane to another.
Mm-hmm. And what's controlling these antennas? Is there a computer behind them?
Yeah, there's the computers, large power sources. Yeah, the first ones really needed an awful lot of energy behind them in order to get things moving. Mm-hmm. And we actually there was our tunnels under Montauk mm-hmm. that go to outer power plants, where you could we could tap off of the energy sources and not have people getting all suspicious about it, and because what is at Montauk, the power sources were not large enough for it.
That were in the base itself.
Yeah, we couldn't draw enough power.
You didn't have your own nuclear reactor down there or anything?
We did, but it wouldn't. It couldn't produce enough power for us.
Wow, you needed that much power.
Yeah.
Wow.
We actually had a tunnel where we ran, and we actually tapped into a power plant in New Jersey, mm-hmm. and we drew power off of there. And at one point, I remember we'd actually shut down a portion of New Jersey. They were without power because we just drew too much out of it. So, and that happened for a few hours that they were without power.
Did they get irritated at you guys?
No, there's not much they could do about it. All they knew is that they had a large power surge, or
or brownout or something like that.
They were being sucked on pretty bad.
It's interesting that it requires so much power. Now, I would assume today it doesn't require near the amount of power.
No, computers have gotten better, power supplies have gotten better, and the antennas themselves have been improved and gotten better.
But would you say today it still requires a fair amount of power? Could you plug it into the wall and do it? Or do you need a direct feed to a power plant like you had back then?
No, I have heard that there are units that are so small now that they can actually fit in a briefcase. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I hear.
Well, that would make sense given the way everything else has been miniaturized.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's just an assumption on your part.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So let's go back to the early 80s. You have the Delta T antennas. Time for time travel. What did you guys decide to do initially? What type of projects? And we've had some conversations earlier with you and Al where we talked about it, but what were the very first projects?
One of the things initially, we got to figure out, when we open up these time holes, where are we going? And basically, there became a lot of mathematics in that. It was a type of mathematics called phi, and it's very hard to find, but it's out there.
How would you spell that?
PHI.
PHI. Okay. Which is what, different than pi?
It's the exact opposite.
Opposite of pi.
And I know some people are going to have a hard time understanding that, some mathematicians, but what it is it's a very higher form of mathematics that it is out there. It can be found. It's just extremely hard to find. There are books on it.
Where do you think the origins of that math came from? Is that what the ETs used?
More than likely, yeah.
Yeah. So that was something that you used to, I would imagine, to figure out how to set the coordinates of where a person was going to go to.
Yeah, that's what eventually came out to be, yeah.
So initially, did you just send like dogs and cameras and things like that through there?
We sent cameras, but we never sent dogs. That's what the Montauk-Boys were for. Yeah. And so yeah, that's where they came into the project as guinea pigs, and what I had used them for in the time travel.
How long did it take for you to figure out the math to know where you're going to send them, so you could program the coordinates? Did that sort of coincide with the arrivals of the Delta T antennas?
No, that was more towards the leaning of the frequencies. You know, you can replicate any frequency, but what it is there's specific points in time. Here's a point in time, and now we're talking, and here's another point in time, and it's all governed by specific. Everything around us, including us, are actually energy. Everything's energy, and so mass is just a jumble of electrons pulling together.
Just slowed down.
It's energy. Yeah, it's energy slowed down.
Right, right.
So.
So you're saying there was a way to actually mathematically represent the vast amount of energy, for instance, as you're sitting here talking to me right now. There must, the way to represent this energy, which we call you, Larry, it boggles my mind.
In theory, in using, if I was to copy and record your body, your frequency, because we all have our own energies, our own personal frequency. If I was to, take that, copy it, and record it, I could actually make a duplicate of you. An exact duplicate that would know everything that you know.
Okay. Well, I know quite a bit about computers. So could I fit on a 40 meg hard drive?
Oh God, no. You. There again.
How big would my imprint be?
It would be huge. Basically, at that time, like I said earlier, we were using reel-to-reel
tapes, right? So.
And
how big were the capacities of the tapes then? Do you recall?
No, I don't recall, but I do remember that for one person, you had several hundred tapes, several hundred reels of tape.
But that would just take a long time, Larry.
Yeah, and it did.
I mean, I could just see you hours.
Just hours and hours, actually a couple of days.
Now, this is a different dimension to the story then. So, one of these Montauk boys, you would actually go in and for days profile them in a sense, right?
No, actually we didn't. We just sent them.
You just sent those guys?
Yeah, we just sent them.
Well, okay. Well, the ones that you wanted to keep, let's say.
Because that came later. As far as the profiling, because we were still trying to figure out, okay, hey, we've opened up the hole in time. Okay, great. What do we do with it now? Well, we want to see where it's at. Okay, great. So you send somebody through.
Why not a dog, though, initially? Why a human being?
Because a dog can't come back and tell you what they saw.
But apparently most of the boys never came back.
Well, that's true. What it is you got to be careful. You have to be very focused when you're going through time. And if you're not careful, you can actually get sidetracked and you can get lost.
You're saying that the person doing the time traveling must be very focused.
Yes.
So it's almost like a tunnel with side tunnels, right?
True.
And if you take your focus off the main tunnel and go down the side tunnel,
yep, you can end up.
Is that what happens?
You could end up in limbo, or you can end up in some other point in time that you weren't originally intending to go to.
And then you and I simply just don't know what happened to those people.
Yeah, because that's not where the hardware is focused on. So yeah, there's no way to retrieve them.
So you think there's quite a few people out there in limbo right now?
That's very possible.
Because of this experiment?
They could be in limbo. They could be, for all I know, in the side of a mountain.
Well, that certainly leads to another question. What if you got your math wrong, and instead of putting them on the street, you put them
inside a building?
Inside a building?
Or inside a ship, as we had experienced with the Philadelphia experiment? Yeah, that was one of the problems. See, there again, that's where we found out about the human frequency and how important it was to record that. And that's also where the psychics in the psychic chair came in, was to control the human factor. What it was, it was aboard the Eldridge when it went through into its portion of time travel. It had you were taking the physical matter, and the physical matter doesn't change. But what happened was they didn't calculate for the human factor, and so the human factor, the human body, the human frequency is completely different, and is constantly changing. So to speak, it has a general frequency which stays the same, but there are always things in our bodies that are changing constantly, and so you have to compensate for that. And what happened on the Eldridge was you had people moving around on the ship, and so they were moving on a portion of the ship where the ship was shifting through time, and so they actually shifted into one another, and that's why you had people fused into the bulkheads.
Okay, I thought you were going to go that you actually placed the people there using your technology, but sort of made a mistake and put them inside the bulkhead.
No.
But you didn't do that?
No, I didn't do that. That was...
So the only two people that were in what do you call that area? The that Duncan and Ed were in when they jumped off the ship.
That was it's kind of like a time limbo.
Limbo's the word.
Okay, that's the best way to explain it.
Is that where space and time really don't exist? Or just held?
That's where it's held.
Mm-hmm. Just held. When you're in limbo, you're just
you're just there.
You're just there. Okay. So. Were they? I mean, if you're in limbo, could you still have a conversation, or do you just simply you're frozen?
No, you're still there. You're you perform all your normal functions. You can talk and everything. It's just that you're lost in time. And
so kind of like what ghosts are in. Are they in limbo?
Well, that's something else entirely different, because you're talking about basically when the human body dies, you got that energy is still there, and all the cumulative energy of our thoughts and our experiences, and so that all rises up and breaks apart. And as far as a ghost is concerned, that is more of somebody who's holding together a little bit more, and rather than just normally breaking apart and just becoming a part of the energy fields of the world.
So in limbo, it's your physical being is in there.
Right. You're in between the phases of time. And in the time travel.
Okay. So you sent these Montauk boys out. Did many return?
Oh yeah. When things started getting more successful, yeah. Initially, no.
Initially, nobody returned.
Nobody returned.
Wow.
And we were sending cameras through. And we were getting better results with that.
Okay.
Because that was a more structural mass, and it didn't, the frequencies didn't vary quite so much on it.
I am still trying to figure out the relationship between, say, the psychic in the chair and the delta T antenna.
Okay. The psychic in the chair was basically to help hold the human factor together, which was later to be...
You're talking about the human factor as it traveled through the space-time? Right.
So you wouldn't break up, and you wouldn't go crazy. You wouldn't, atomize, I guess, so to speak.
So they were a stabilizer in a sense.
Right. And that was later recorded and kept actually in a computer, that so that you could travel safely through without ever having to reuse a psychic every time.
You're saying the experience that the psychic was having, you pulled that, you recorded that?
That's correct.
Okay, digitized it somehow, put it on a tape, and then in the next time when you wanted to time travel, you could just replay that tape?
Yeah, actually later on it was burned into more advanced computers.
Burned into the chipsets or something like that?
That's correct.
So you had your own, say, your own computer, which you would roll that up and say, hey, this is Mike's computer, this is Mike's profile.
No, actually, at that point, you didn't even need it for an individual anymore. It was basically geared for the human frequency.
Oh, just human in general. So there was a point where you didn't need the psychics in the chair anymore.
That's true.
Right? But you did in the beginning to stabilize the person's going through. Okay.
We did do continuous experiments afterwards, but that was for other projects, and to experiment with other things to see what we could get out of them. Like Duncan had pulled in a creature, so that was one instance where he was in the chair at the time. And he pulled in the creature. The creature was he found somewhere in limbo there, in the time continuum.
Okay. Do you think he had found it just at that one point in time? Or had he seen him before and invited him in 1983? Because this was August 12th, 1983. You don't know, do you?
Only Duncan can answer that one.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, Duncan doesn't want to talk much about this stuff.
Yeah,
Okay.
from what I understand, he used to talk, but he, like many folks, have gotten scared. So.
Well, I think his thing is not so much being scared, but it's he just doesn't want to deal with it.
Well, you get that factor too.
Right.
I mean,
it was just too much for him to handle at this point in the year 2000, and that's why he's not. He just.
Well, it does. You know, I mean, it's a hard subject to deal with in the first place.
Right.
And you know, and people kind of like to live with blinders on sometimes. That you know, it's just too much for them to handle. So it's easier to disbelieve it than to be open-minded about it and take a chance in believing it.
Even the people in the program?
Well, yeah, because you know, it's what it is you're working on this project, and it's going against 100% all your beliefs, and so yeah, it's a heavy weight on you mentally, and so yeah, some people have a hard time with it.
Did you see a lot of people opt out of the program?
Yeah, but not right away. Most of that, you know, came later on. People dealing with their own demons.
So there were regrets later on of just say all these boys who were being massacred in a sense.
Yeah.
You really didn't know what happened with them, but
right.
You knew they didn't come back.
Well, at that time, you know, you look at them, you know, they're just guinea pigs in the project. So at that time, I wasn't aware of the other things that were going on, the other experimentations that were happening to them. I didn't find that out until much later.
Well, when time travel was actually accomplished, was there a lot of excitement, a lot of attention? I mean, this is, to me, is a very significant thing.
Well, I don't know that there was so much excitement per se. It may have been for other people. It was more like, well, geez, you know, we've been working on this for years, you know, and we've picked it apart and picked it apart and picked it apart, and finally we've got something here, and you know that you know we've obtained our goal, and
but
so
how about
we've already
from the
prepared.
outside?
We've already prepared to you know what we're going to do with it by this point.
But just say from the outside, I mean, all the people who were spending the billions of dollars, I would imagine, there must have been some showing of gratitude and pleasure or whatever that this thing had finally been accomplished. Or was it all just so robotic?
I'm sure there was.
No champagne bottles popping, corks flying in the air. You know, wow, we have time travel.
No, it was just basically, okay, we finally, you know, have achieved our objective. All right, now let's continue on doing what we needed, you know, what we wanted to do.
So you guys didn't party much down there, did you?
We didn't. I'm sure others did.
Yeah.
But no, we didn't. We had finally achieved another phase, basically. I mean, you didn't party every time, you know, you achieved a new phase. I mean.
Well, we do around here.
Well. Well, some people do. Some
we look
people
forward to the next phase. Okay. So it's everybody I talk to on this project. I always get the sense that it was very focused, very strict, very unemotional.
You almost had to be with it.
Yeah, very unemotional. That's why the partying wasn't there. It was like, okay, boom, we're done. Now let's move to the next thing. Almost like, you know, you're
we knew that we were working on something big, and it's something that, you know, is bigger than the average person, and so the average person is going to have a hard time dealing with it to begin with. Period. And of course, you also have to be prepared for, you know, abuses, as far as you know, once you have something, you know, as sensitive as time control. you want to be careful with it because you don't want it falling into the wrong hands.
What could happen if it did fall in the wrong hands?
Oh, let's say you get a world leader who's like Saddam Hussein, who even his own people consider him mad to a certain extent, and he wants to, use it, to change, like say the Gulf War. I mean, that's very dangerous stuff there. So, yeah, you want to keep it, out of his hands, just like you want to keep a nuke out of that man's hands.
Well, hopefully it is so complicated that someone like him could not replicate the work you did.
Well, see, that was the thing, is what we were doing as we were making our breakthroughs, we were simplifying also. So, it became easier as time went on.
So, I mean, theoretically, here it is 2000. Theoretically, it's possible, say, 2010, if Saddam Hussein was still alive, he gives someone $1 billion, buys one of these machines, and goes back and changes the outcome of the war.
Yeah, and that's why it has to be, we knew at the time that you have to, be very careful with this, make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands.
But, you and I just yesterday looked at some catalogs where you can buy some of this equipment.
Well, yeah, government contractors, build the equipment, and but unless you know what it's for, it doesn't do you much good. I mean, you can use it for different applications.
Right.
I'm sure.
For
but
like microwaving eggs on the side of a roof. But not time travel, huh? Because there's a lot of different pieces involved.
Yeah, a lot of different pieces involved. You have to hit the right frequencies and whatnot.
Okay, and you can't do that with just one piece of equipment. Who do you actually think has time travel capability right now?
There's actually more than one group. Once we had made our breakthroughs, and we were able to, still, work, quite privately for a while, without many people knowing about it. Other groups started getting involved and wanting, to take control for their own personal gain. And so the things kind of got out of control there, and which is what we were trying to avoid. But there again, it's kind of like, keeping a secret. If you want to keep a secret, you keep it to yourself.
But this is what I think our listeners are going to find challenging, mentally challenging to process. We had talked earlier that you went back and actually re-engineered the outcome of the Civil War.
Yes.
So could I assume then that up to that point in time, say up to 1980, that the South had actually won the Civil War?
Well, see, that's on a different time plane, though. It's, in a parallel universe. There, as we talked before, that we know that there are several parallel universes, and we can assume that that did happen that way, but in a parallel universe.
But if you wanted to go back and change that, for instance, when you were in the early 80s and had undertaken that project to go back and change the outcome of the Civil War, what was at that point in time your reality? Was it that the South had won, or was it that the North had won?
I believe at that time that was the South had won, and that was one of the things that we had changed.
Okay, so you're saying only for the group of people that were involved in the project do they have any memory of that reality?
That's true.
All the rest of us, myself included,
have an alternate reality.
Have an alternate reality where all we can remember and experience is that the North had won.
That's correct.
That's hard to buy. But you're saying that's correct.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying you have to really expand your mind a little bit to think about that.
To expand on that and help you understand a little bit more, let's take you up to World War II. World War II, it had come down as Hitler had originally lost.
That's how I remember World War II.
Yeah.
That Hitler lost.
That was also changed to see what would happen, what the outcome would be if he had actually won.
So this was an experiment then, right?
It was an experiment.
What if Hitler won the war? That was a question someone asked.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was your job to go back with, I guess, a team of people.
There was several that went back.
Would you say it was a dozen?
It was a large project for that one.
Were they mostly Montauk-boys that were sent back?
Well, actually, when you're changing, a history on such a grand scale involving wars, it involved, great numbers of people. But
thousands?
Well, in the case of the Montauk-Boys, yes, because those were more, like I said, instruments and tools that we used, where we were more of the controllers and players,
So what could have been done? I mean, in my mind, Hitler lost big time. I mean, what could have been done so that the tide of the war could have been changed?
Well, what I'll bring you up to date on that is it was just an experiment to see what would happen if he won. Did that and said, okay, great, we see what happened now. We need to change it back, okay, to make sure that he lost. And we can actually go back, and I actually have seen and held it where we actually had night scopes back then. And there again, that's something in the early 40s and mid 40s. I mean, who ever heard of a night scope? Infrared.
Didn't exist back then.
Yeah, but yet we can find evidence where they actually did exist. We had them, and they were built back then. We actually had a manufacturer who built them.
But I don't think night scopes alone would have changed the war.
No, but that was just one aspect. That helped in changing a lot of the aspects. There was a lot of political manipulation, along with battle manipulation. And giving new technologies. So yeah, it was that was my point with the night scope was.
So that was one example. Is what
yeah,
you're saying.
It's an example that by introducing the night scope, that of course not many people had. I mean, there was still something that it wasn't something that was just handed out to say a regular infantryman. That was not part of his normal gear. Just the same as they weren't handed automatic weapons. There were only small groups that got automatic weapons during this World War II.
Well, Larry, as I think about the task, undertaking this task, it would have had to been enormous to change the tide of the war. To Hitler winning it.
Yeah.
Where in the world would you get the resources to bear upon this project? I mean, because it took everything that the United States had to win the war. You would have to have had some resources equal to or above to what the United States had to change the tide of the war.
Well, therein lies a lot of our funding. We did have black project funding, but we also did things too, like we had purchased most of our stuff was liquid. We bought property, buildings, and that sort of thing, and then turned around and sold them many years later, 20, 30 years later, and made 500 times the profit. And so we got funding that way. Stole a lot of it. I'm sure you've heard about Nazi gold and that sort of thing. And it's just the stuff disappeared, and that's what it was. Is we had liquefied that we had stolen that liquefied asset, and converted it over for us to use.
So how many billions of dollars do you think you eventually had in your coffers?
Oh, geez. I mean, we were spending the stuff as fast as we could get it, so there's no way to account. But yeah, I mean, it goes into the billions, as far as
into the many billions.
Yeah.
Wow. But you know, you're spending this kind of money. Don't you think eyebrows were raised somewhere, saying, "Whoa, you know"?
No, because it's
just got $1 billion order from this underground facility in Montauk. You know, maybe we need to check this out.
No, because you know, this is a big country, and you know, let's say you know, a large corporation buys a boatload of computers. Okay, nobody really questions where that money came from.
No,
Yeah, they just, okay, we got this order for computers.
Yeah, they're just happy they got the order.
Yeah, and because you buy things like that, and you don't, you know, you spread out because you need, you know, more than just one particular object. So yeah, as you're spreading things out, nobody really pays attention.
Okay, so you talked about World War II changing the outcome and then going back and saying, let's change it back. What did you find that happened to this existence, which, say, we're in right now, had Hitler won? What would it have been like?
One of the things was he had several secret aircraft, which we do know of today, that we made sure that those never actually got off the ground. Those, in actuality, did. One of the things was he did develop a bomber that was able to reach America. And one of our ways of deterring that from, you know, in the outcome was we made sure that that bomber was shot down. And it was never rebuilt.
Okay, so that's what you did to help
bring things back.
Bring things back. Now, but on their own?
But on their own.
Would you still lost the war?
Yeah, because what was is that bomber was able to make it to America. It was no longer experimental. They ran into full production, and so yeah, they had long-range bomber. The other thing was is that they were working on nuclear physics, and they were able to develop, you know, the atomic bomb, and they were one of the world leaders in rocketry at the time. So yeah, they had their own delivery system also, and of course they were also leaders in jet technology also, and jet propulsion. And so yeah, they had jet fighters that couldn't even match anything that we had, because, you know, we had all props. So,
but on their own, assuming you didn't mess with space-time at all,
right?
Would Germany have won or lost the war?
No, they actually had lost originally.
Okay, they lost the war. However, in order for you to get them to participate in this experiment, where they had won the war, you were able to exploit things like their research in nuclear technology, their long-range bombers, their research in jet engines.
That's correct.
And boost that along a little bit, and then that helped them to win the war.
Right.
In your experiment.
Right.
Okay, but now when you went back, you had to shoot that bomber down, you had to destroy the jets, etc., right?
Right.
Okay, now it brings up a question. What happens if you make too many changes in a timeline?
Basically, and I believe we discussed this earlier, about you know, if you're going back to a certain point, you get to a point where you're hitting so many alternate realities that
or changing them,
that you hit one specific reality too many times, and you change it too many times in the same spot at the same time, that you actually get a fracture, which ends up destroying that particular portion of time.
Have you ever seen this happen?
No, I have not, but I've heard that it's come close to actually happening.
Mm. And these fractures, I mean, does your perception of what you're seeing in front of you change if you're in that reality?
Yeah, it does.
Would you see kind of holes in the...
Sure.
And
you can actually feel it a little bit sometimes.
Hmm.
Maybe that's just me because I was so much a part of the project and the process. But yeah, I can feel it.
Oh, so you could feel it if you went to one of these realities that this was about to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. But to your knowledge, we've never blinked out a reality yet.
Not to my knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I'll bet you there's somebody out there listening saying, did you ever go back and say, create a reality where Kennedy had lived?
Yeah, I believe so. And what it was is he was eliminated in the first place because he wanted to end the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
And what it was is that was too much of a profit factor for big business.
Mm-hmm.
And certain people in the government. And one of the big things about the Vietnam War was it was not about helping the people. It was all about opium and the opium fields. We've all heard the stories about soldiers who got court-martialed because they torched a poppy field. Well, they needed to clear the area. That was what they were told to do. Clear the area, the foliage.
Mm-hmm.
But why a poppy field? Well, because that was the sole, harvest for opium.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be surprised that how many products that we have today that actually contain it. Robitussin has traces of opium. If you want to go into alcoholic beverages, Jägermeister has opium in it. It's a type of medicine that, but it's a drug that has been abused, and so it's in a more controlled fashion. But also, it was all a way of government trying to control society and also make money at the same time.
Well, is it a mind-controlled drug as well?
I'm sure it's been used as that in the past. I don't know all the effects of it, but because I'm not a drug user, but it was a way to make money, a way to make black cash.
So it was obviously operational for perhaps many years, these opium fields, 30s and the 40s and all the rest of that stuff. Weren't there trade routes into China?
Sure.
Is that where they sold a lot of it?
I'm sure that a lot of people have seen or heard about the movie Air America. Air America actually did exist and was run by the CIA.
Right, right. Okay, so what you're saying is that there was a big reason for Kennedy being killed, and it had to do with this machinery.
Well, it had to do with he wanted to end the Vietnam War.
He wanted to end it. Okay. So did you ever experiment and say, what if Kennedy wasn't killed? And what was that reality like, assuming he was not killed?
The war ended. That was pretty much it.
That was it?
That was it.
And, I mean, I would think, was he reelected?
No, he wasn't reelected.
No.
But it did create quite a different, alternate universe or alternate reality, because well, it is people still didn't question his being in office. Also, along with coupled with years and years of other presidents being in office, people never really questioned very much of what the president was doing, what his job was, that sort of thing. The era of the Kennedys brought out a lot of things like, people having affairs in the White House. You know, it was all kept very hush-hush. You know, covered. You know, the press knew about it, but there was a certain respect that, unlike with Clinton, they said, "Oh well, you know, as long as it's not affecting, you know, his work, you know, it doesn't have anything to do with the presidency, and so therefore it doesn't have any effect, and so we'll just ignore it because that is actually bringing down the country, and it's actually a type of treason almost." And you know, it'd be almost considered a treasonous act to accuse the president of such, you know, a thing. Just as you know, the whole Monica Lewinsky thing. I mean, that was a group of people who conspired to bring this out. There was no reason to bring it out. Everybody, you know, as far as you know, just about every president has done that. You know, had an affair. So why is it such a big deal all of a sudden? You know, that's the whole point.
Just more
it's
known.
not a big deal. But it was a conspiracy to bring down the Clinton government.
Okay, so let's. That's something else. But let's go back to this original question. How I stated that was, if Kennedy did survive, what would reality be like, say today?
People wouldn't be they wouldn't be questioning.
There'd be more faith in government.
There would be more faith in government.
Would our economy be better off or worse off?
See, that's one of the things. Everything just kind of fell by the wayside. Remember, that was the height of the Cold War.
Right.
And the Cold War was very much out of control. And basically, they spent so much money fighting the Cold War that when they found out things like, oh, the Russians didn't have as many nukes as we thought they had, well, you got other people saying, well, we've got this huge machine that's employing people. We can't just, you know, get rid of it. So what we do, we make it bigger instead. You know, and
that's why they had the Vietnam War, right? Keep the machine going.
Well, yeah, basically keeping the machine going.
Right. So, okay. So, again, is it really just hard to answer whether we were better off or worse off?
It actually drove us into the ground financially as a country.
Oh, it did? Why? Because we built the machine bigger?
We built and built and built. And we actually ran ourselves, from the recession in the 80s, ran ourselves into another depression. And eventually, you know, crushed ourselves under our own weight of...
Kind of like what the Soviets went through.
Exactly.
So we went through what the Soviets went through.
Right.
Wow. So that's why I guess the decision to let Kennedy die was left alone.
Right.
You know, that's really fascinating.
It's really deep, too.
Was there any wars, though?
So that's the whole thing, is, you know, we built all these toys and they weren't being used. So
did Bobby Kennedy get elected president? Do you recall?
Yeah, I believe so. He was of the, you know, a very similar mindset as his brother.
Right. Okay. Okay. You sort of have, was that sort of a minor project for you?
Yeah, that was very minor.
Very minor. All right. Well, listen, it's been good. We've spent about an hour and a half talking right now. Why don't we take a break and we'll take this conversation up a little later.
Okay.
Okay? Thanks.